I'm going to be talking about Atlantis and why it was so important. This information may not resonate with you, and that's okay. This is going to be a simplified version, as simplified as I can make it. So our time matrix has been around for about 950 billion years. I'm going to show you what I mean by time matrix. This is a Cathar grid, so this is our time matrix. In other words, our planetary system, our blueprint of our planets and things like that. At Stargate 11, we have Metatron, who started a huge takeover like 250 billion years ago. And then here at Stargate 3, we have us on Earth. And when I say Metatron as a being, he's not literally one person though, and founders at that level, like beings at that level, are multidimensional. So it's like one entity is a collective of them. So it was a bunch of them. Metatron is like a bunch of entities that decided they wanted to take over. They decided to take over because they wanted to be immortal. So let's go back to Atlantis. So a race called the Azurite race, which was in a different Stargate in our time matrix. So in that grid that I just showed you, they were in another gate. And they decided that they were going to eventually have to send in beings because they knew eventually Metatron was going to try and do this takeover because they can see possibilities of the future. So they were like 20 steps ahead. So they made these plates for humankind to come across eventually. It's specific humans sometimes, but specifically, doesn't matter who received the information. It was to have the information spread it out. So Atlantis, that's where Atlantis comes in. Atlantis was important because that's where they stored a bunch of their information. One of the most important information was the CDT plates. And at first it was a book. It was like a leather book, and it was about 550,000 pages. Later on, they upgraded it and it turned into these metal plates that when you touch them with the right frequency, well, not touch them, but when you transmit with the right frequency, they'll activate, and then it'll show you like a hologram, visual, audio of whatever it is, and it tells you everything from intergalactic to intergalactic to consciousness. I mean, it just talks about everything in our time matrix, how everything works, like everything, our history, everything, evolutionary process, everything. Metatron really wanted these. Pretty much any being in this planet or in this planetary system that was against Chris' blueprint wanted these plates. You could do a lot with these plates. So the Elohim started releasing beings that would be able, like a few at a time. It was like known to be like 3 at a time. Sometimes that would come to be able to read these plates or train from a very young age to be able to understand all of this and then be able to translate it to beings here on Earth to help awaken them. Enoch is an example of somebody that was actually a story that was in the Bible and then later got taken out. But Enoch, he was able to get his hands on the CDT plates and was able to translate them. He was allowed to. And also another example was Jesheua, also known as Jesheua 9, Jesheua 12. He's in the Bible as well, but later it got changed to Jesus and they changed the story around. Eventually, Atlantis got destroyed with a bunch of information, but some beings still have that information to this day. So part 2 about the Atlantis and the CDT plate. So like I said in the last video, Enoch was one of the beings that ended up being able to get their hands on a CDT plate because they were allowed to transmit that information to then be able to tell other beings, humans here on Earth. It was the sense of our awakening. Because remember, the CDT plates had a bunch of information, which then whoever had this information can bring it back to humanity. That was the point. Metatron didn't want that. Metatron had in store his own plan. So our original time matrix Cathar grid is this one right here, and Metatron was creating this one right here. So pretty much what he was doing is doing reversal mathematics, reversal math, all he can of what Creator had created. He reversed it to try to create this over here, what we have over here. So this is a Christ blueprint, this is correct, and this is an anti-Christ blueprint. It doesn't necessarily mean Metatron is bad. It's just that he just has his own agenda. It seems like he's scared to pass away and go back to Creator, and he just really wants to stay in his form, and he can't do that being in the form he is. So that's why he's decided to take over an entire matrix, because he feels like he can live here then immortally for forever because it's its own world. But that's not, like, Creator won't let him stay doing that for forever. So Enoch ends up with CDT plates, and he's able to translate them and makes a whole book about it and everything. It was in the Bible. It gets taken. Also, this man named Jesheua, also known as what later they changed in the Bible to Jesus. Please, what I'm about to say is just information I'm passing on. Everybody has the right to their own opinion. You don't have to agree with this. So what actually ended up happening is the Elohim, which are founders above, knew that Metatron was going to do all of this mess, and they started sending in beings from way ahead to be prepared for all this. Jesheua 12 and Jesheua 9 were sent in here to help on a mission. Jesheua 12 was a lot in Egypt, and he ended up being like working with the high priest and everything in there. He had a bunch of training done, and Egypt taught him their ways. He also had a lot of Eastern training as well. As for Jesheua 9, he had a lot of philosophical training, but not just in like Eastern, but he had a bunch more variety. And eventually he ended up in Egypt with Jesheua 12, which is pretty much the same being, but they didn't connect that at the time. And Jesheua 12 offers to train Jesheua 9. Jesheua 9 becomes very outspoken about his teachings and what he thinks, and he brings in new ideas, and Egypt wasn't having it. So a whole mess begins of everybody going against Jesheua 9. Jesheua 12 at this time is put away for safety pretty much because he needs to continue for his family lineage to continue on earth. That's when Elohim decided. Okay, so part 3 to what I was discussing, which is about the Cathara grid, Metatron, Enoch, Jesheua, the Bible, things like that got all distorted. So back to Jesheua 9 and Jesheua 12. So Jesheua 12 lived in Egypt. These are two beings that were actually pretty much the same being, but they didn't know it at the time. Founders had sent them down from way before because they knew Metatron was going to try to do this whole takeover. So they needed beings to come in to implant seeds into humanity to keep us reminder of who we truly are. Because Metatron distorted everything to this day. That's what you think is our 3D reality, is controlled by Metatron. You don't have to be controlled by him, though, because you have free will. So back to Jeshua's. So Jesheua 12 worked in Egypt as a high priest, and he had a lot of training. Jesheua 9 came along. He had his own training from all over the place, too. Jesheua 12 took notice to him and was like, hey, do you want to be here in Egypt and get this training? And Jesheua 9 was for it. He trained him. He trained him really good. And Jesheua knew, wait a minute, Egypt was corrupted in a sense, and their practices were corrupted. So Jesheua and I started speaking out about that. The founders above knew that this was going to happen, and they started putting in place motions. They had a man that was born before all this was put into motion. I'm probably going to say his name wrong, and I'm so sorry, but it's like Al-Bahari. And he was living a normal life. Jesheua 9 didn't know about any of this either. Like, he didn't start going around learning all this till he was like 30s, like 32. So Jesheua 12 teaches Jesheua 9. Everybody begins to persecute Jesheua 9 because he's vocal about it. Like, hey, these teachings are, this and that. And people aren't liking it. Jesheua 12 founders come down and they speak to him. They're like, hey, you got to leave from Egypt because things are going to get messy and we can't have you dying. They needed Jesheua 9 and Jesheua 12 both to survive because they were here because of their lineage. They were here because of their DNA to help keep their DNA on the planet. So the founders create the man, Al-Bahari, and he's the one that they begin to send visions to, and he believes he's Jesheua. He believes he's Jesus. He continues a huge movement, which was still important because what a beautiful thing to have people have faith in Creator. But eventually it did get distorted in the Bible by Metatron, by the churches. So Jesheua 9 gets away, Jesheua 12 gets away, Jesheua 9 ends up having kids, and those kids have his blood, which continues the lineage on earth to this day, and so does Jesheua 12. He ends up with having children with 6 different women, but not as polygamy, but just to continue his lineage because that's what was asked of him. Al-Bahari did end up getting crucified. He's the one that is spoken about in the Bible, and the story does get changed around. Founders feel horrible, but he did his part, and they were so proud of him. They end up resurrecting him, which is the hologram people later see, and he lives another 30 years, and he's okay.